Morning again, everybody. Thanks for attending this morning's session. I hope it's going to be really informative and very useful for you all. My name is Andrew Wilson. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. It's all around reducing carbon in the highway sector. Obviously, carbon being forefront of the sustainability agenda for very obvious reasons at the moment. So we hope today's session will help yourselves, your suppliers, your partners, your stakeholders to understand and address the carbon issue and help to measure and reduce your carbon going forwards. This session is brought to you by the Supply Chain School on behalf of Highways England and several of their delivery integration partners, or DIPs, that are working together under the 8.7 billion framework, the Regional Delivery Partnership. So it's a pleasure to be hosting this for you today. Can we have the next slide, please, James? And go on one further one. Thanks, James. Few housekeeping notes just before we get started and have a look at the agenda. There is a Q&A function within Zoom, so any questions, please drop them into the Q&A box and we'll monitor those throughout the session as we deliver for you, and we'll come back and have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, if that's okay. Please share your feedback as well. My colleague will be sending around a short questionnaire, and we value your feedback to continue improving these events. The slides themselves will be shared with all of the participants, those who make it and those who couldn't make it. And what we're doing for all of the training that we're delivering under the Regional Delivery Partnership is we're recording the sessions and providing links on the Highways England page of the Supply Chain School website. So we'll point you towards that as well. So don't feel the need to scribble loads and loads of notes, because you'll have access to the recording and all of the slides from this morning. Okay, next slide, please, James. Thank you very much. Just a short introduction from me, then I'm going to pass across to my colleague, James Cadman, who's a lead consultant with Action Sustainability, the organisation that sits behind and delivers the school's activities. James is then going to host this morning's event and welcome Dean and Tim and Emma, who've got a collaborative case study to share with you around addressing carbon, reducing carbon. Dean's going to talk about the Highways England strategy, and Tim and Emma, as valued partners and suppliers into Highways England across their infrastructure, are going to talk about the technology and about their approach to delivering for Highways England. We're then going to have a panel Q&A, and hopefully we'll get finished by 11:30. Next slide, please, James. Just a few very brief notes from me before we get started about the Regional Delivery Partnership. Hopefully everyone on the call will be aware of this, some in a lot more detail than others. As I say, it's pretty much a £9 billion framework lasting for 5 years, which comprises over 30 major road improvement schemes for the strategic road network across England. There are 13 in total delivery integration partners, prime contractors leading the work very closely with Highways England across England, and the Supply Chain School is supporting the Regional Delivery Partnership with a dedicated programme of support. So we'll have a little look at what that comprises. If we can move on to the next slide, please, James. Just very quickly, there's 3 main areas of the support programme that we're working on over the next few years. There'll be performance measurement, sustainability performance measurement. There's a number of training events happening on an annual basis. This is one of those training events. And there's a vast amount of online learning as well, which is available free of charge to any supplier on an individual or company level across the supply chain. So just a tiny bit more detail on that. Next slide, please, James. Training activity. We've already done several of these sessions. We've got workshops as well as these broader information-led webinar sessions taking place throughout the year. So we've already done several of these. We've done one on well-being, we've done one on collaborative working, we've done one on off-site as well recently. We've done a number of sessions on fairness, inclusion and respect. We've got one coming up on social value and modern slavery further into the latter half of this year. So keep up to date with the Supply Chain School website. The events listing on that website will provide you with links to all of the free training activity which is being provided through this programme. Next slide, please, James. Online learning, again, just very quickly, there's a vast amount of resources held within the school's website. So please, if you haven't already, have a look in more detail at those. Set yourself up with an individual learning account, do a self-assessment, and provide yourself with an action plan that you can follow to track and monitor your own learning at an individual level. And the school will join your account together with others from your organization into a corporate level supply chain school account as well, where you can track your company's activity in terms of learning across many different areas of sustainability. So have a look at all the online learning if you haven't so far. Next slide, please, James. Just as a continuation of that, the school have, over the last year or so, been working hard to provide learning pathways and have curated areas of learning for suppliers in certain programs or who are interested in particular topics that the school provides resources in. Highways England have worked with the school to provide 2 learning pathways for their supply chain. So again, if you haven't noticed these, then please have a look on the website for Core 1 and Core 2 learning pathways, which Highways England would like all of their suppliers to participate in. Core 1 is a very short pathway, bringing together various short videos. Core 2 is slightly more detailed, but both of those are available freely via the learning pathways area of your individual account within the supply chain school. Last but not least, just next slide, James, the final slide from myself is to just mention the sustainability tool. The school has developed a bespoke version of the sustainability tool, which is available and measuring sustainability issues and impact across the regional delivery partnership. So we're using this at the moment on 9 schemes which are operational across England. As schemes become operational across the 5 years of the RDP, we'll be rolling out the sustainability tool and hoping to use this as a mechanism to measure and improve sustainability performance across all of the schemes that constitute the regional delivery partnership. So all of the prime contractors are working with us on this, and if you haven't been involved already, keep a lookout for notifications from the sustainability tool. Set yourself up with an account on this platform and start contributing data so we can measure and improve sustainability performance, as I say, across the major schemes that are being delivered as part of RDP. So that's it from me. I'm going to pass across to James, my colleague, who's going to lead the rest of this session and welcome the other speakers. So I'll pass the mic to you, James. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. Yes, just to introduce myself, I'm James Cadman. I'm a consultant within Action Sustainability. I focus on delivering carbon expertise and training through the school. And some of your organisations might be aware of the Climate Action Group that the Supply Chain School runs, very much focused on the same topic. So I'm just going to take you very briefly through the next 20 minutes or so through some kind of basics about carbon reduction. Some of you may know a lot of this already, but it's here as provided to give everybody the same kind of understanding of where we're coming from. We're also going to do a short poll with you using Mentimeter. If any of you have been on any of the Supply Chain School webinars or workshops in the last 15, 16 months, you'll be aware of Mentimeter. For those of you who don't, it's a bit like Kahoot or Slido. You can access it through your smartphone or an internet browser tab. So we'll come on to that a bit later. But just to essentially get you set up on that, if you've got a smartphone to hand, the easiest way is just to open up a tab in your smartphone and go to menti.com. You can download the app if you wish. There is an app for Menti in the iPhone store or the Google store. Essentially, they're the same thing. What you should be getting when you load that up is something that looks like this, if I can show that on the screen. It's very simply menti.com, and you get a box to insert a PIN number when that PIN number comes up. So just wait for the PIN number. But if you can get that ready, because we shall do a quiz. You don't need to disconnect from the Zoom call that we have now. You can keep them in parallel. If you have 2 screens, that's great, but if not, you can have 2 tabs and you can still listen to what's going on and maybe split your screens, but you definitely don't need to disconnect. Okay. what we're going to be talking about, or what I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes, is just, as I say, a brief run through some of the key issues, the key wider topics that we are talking about. So very briefly, the Climate Change Act in the UK and how that plays into what we need to do as a country and net zero, and similarly how that is linked to science-based targets. They're related but different. Public Procurement Notice 0621, PPN 0621, that came out in June, as the 06 implies, what that is talking to us about in terms of public purchasing. A bit more on net zero, and then some jargon busting on scopes, scope 1, 2 and 3, and then a little bit about the carbon reduction hierarchy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is move to the Mentimeter now. So if you've had time to get your phone or your other tab opened up with www.menti.com, and I can see some of you are in there already, quick on the trigger. So the question to all of you is, what words come to mind when you think of climate change and carbon? And within Menti, you'll have 3 boxes. You can enter 3 words or 3 statements. I believe it allows you up to 25 characters. And you can populate in that. Unlike any kind of word cloud, the more times a particular word or phrase is entered, the bigger the font gets. Excellent. So we're seeing a lot about net zero. The environment is front and center. We've got, I saw the word catastrophe somewhere. I'm sure many of you have seen the weather forecasts and the weather reports on Canada and Western USA. Net zero is coming up a lot. Climate refugees, yes, that's really important. Just as a kind of a notice, we're going to be running a webinar later in the autumn about how those 2 things mix, the impact on people, on refugees, on modern slavery, how climate change is driving some of that, as well as impacts on the weather. Pollution, definitely coming up. Lots of comments, that's great. I noticed there's about 100 delegates here, so we've got lots of good answers here. Uncontrolled, renewable energy, so there's some positive things coming out as well. It's not just all about the disaster and the catastrophe side of things. Responsibility, yes, definitely, we have a responsibility. Okay, excellent. I'm going to pause that there. Thank you very much. For those of you who haven't realised yet, the code is in the chat box that Steph has put in there for you, and it's also on the screen, of course, at the top of the screen. So I'm going to move to the next question. And this is a multiple choice. Does your organisation have a carbon reduction strategy? Yes, in development. No, don't know. Just while you're filling in that, I'm going to close that. And this is going to be useful for our speakers in a little bit to understand what that split looks like. Okay, so we've roughly got a 50-50 split. Well, most organisations have got one, or one is in development. Okay, I'll just give that another few seconds, just to see if anyone else wants to add in. Okay, so we'll wait till we get to about 60. Okay, so what I'm seeing there is 52 out of 60 odd organisations have got a strategy, or one is in development, which is really pleasing to see. When I ran a similar poll maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, the numbers were a lot different. They were more to the right-hand side of that histogram. So it's pleasing to see that organisations are developing their strategies or implementing them, putting them in place. Okay, so in terms of your carbon reporting, do you measure and report your carbon emissions? Yes, we measure all scopes 1, 2 and 3. Yes, but only scopes 1 and 2. It's still in development. Don't know and no. Okay, so that's a pleasing curve coming down there on the graph. So I'm seeing 30 out of 50, about 60% do report currently. with another 20% in development. And by all scopes, we'll come on to this in a little bit, what we mean by scopes. So there'll be a little bit of a quiz as well, what we mean by scopes 1, 2, and 3, just to see where people are at. Okay, that's great, thank you. So what am I seeing there? I'm seeing 34 out of 55. So over half of the organizations are measuring and reporting, which is really good. Excellent. Okay, so here's another word cloud. What actions are you currently taking or planning to take on reducing your carbon emissions? Again, you should have 3 boxes with 25 characters in each. Think about the way you operate. Think about the vehicles you use. Think about the materials that you consume. Think about how you work on site. What are some of the activities you're doing specifically to address carbon emissions? Excellent. Hydrogen I've seen there already, that's great. So renewables like solar, green hydrogen, hopefully not blue hydrogen. Education, smack bang in the middle, wonderful. That's why we're here today, isn't it? Electrification, yep, that's really good. Reduction of materials, I saw steel reduction in there. So yes, being leaner with the materials that we consume and use, that we procure. Cycling, so different forms of transport in there. HVO, definitely, that's a hot topic at the moment, HVO. And because you've put in so many great answers, the font is really small. Smarter procurement, yes, there's definitely smarter procurement in that. Understanding what we need to buy and what the priorities are for that procurement. What are the sustainability issues? What's the value we can get out of it? Lots of stuff about renewables in there, alternative fuels. Agile working, yes, if the last 16 months have taught us anything, it's that we don't need to be in the same office every day. Excellent. ISO 50001, so yeah, the energy management system standard, excellent. Decarbonising our fleet. Reusable materials, yeah, there's something that's really important here. We're focusing on carbon today, but there's so many concomitant impacts as well, whether it's air quality, circular economy, renewable sources of materials. All of these are linked. You know, it's definitely a case of 2 birds and 1 stone, or several birds and 1 stone, but no birds were hurt in that. Okay, super, great. I'm going to pause that there. Thank you very much. We're going to download these afterwards, by the way, as a PDF so we can share them with people. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on. Okay, so this is one way you can rank the answers here. So what do you see as the biggest hurdles to you using lower carbon alternatives? What's in the way? So we've got all these positive ideas of what we can do: hydrogen, electrification, lower embodied carbon materials. Really great ideas, really great innovations, and great ways of working. But what's preventing us? What are some of the issues? This is not exhaustive, by the way. I'm sure you can come up with other reasons that I haven't. But if you want to rank these, and where it works on your screen is you can drag them, or you type in you choose which one's first, and then it offers you a set, and you choose which one's second. It should be fairly intuitive. So you can see I've put up 8 possible reasons why. So the acceptance, you know, the material might exist, for example, but if people won't accept the warranty or the testing procedure or something like that might be there. Cost, clearly, that comes up time and time again. Reliability of the method or the product or the fuel or the solution, is it as reliable as the business as usual version? Has there been enough use of it over time for people to go, yep, that's reliable, I know it's going to do the job I want it to do? Are people just aware of these things? Is there an awareness of alternatives, or is it just easier to go with what you know? There's a compatibility issue as well. There's something around lean standardization here. If we can standardize some of this and they're multi-compatible. The obvious example in our everyday lives is a mobile phone charger. Having those compatible, having a plug socket that's compatible makes things a lot easier. And then things about lifetime and maintenance and durability. You know, it might be a great product or a great solution, but if you've got to do more maintenance or it doesn't last as long, then it's obviously not going to be as great, is it? Okay. So possibly unsurprisingly, cost comes out top. That's something maybe for the panelists to dig into when they come to their presentations. But interestingly, acceptance of specifications and bureaucracy that goes around this could be getting in the way. Okay, great. Thanks for the next question now. So we're going to get into scopes. So this is testing you about scopes 1, 2, and 3. So we're going back to school, greenhouse gas emission reporting 101. If you consume electricity in your offices or your depot or your factory, which GHG scope does that fall into? Is it 1, 2, or 3? If you don't know, you've got a 1 in 3 chance. If you look at the screen, there might be a bit of a hint. But this will be really good to understand where people are at. The reason that we're doing this, and we've got 5 of these questions, is because the language of carbon is becoming more and more the lingua franca in effect of describing how we use carbon. So being able to understand what scope 1, 2, and 3 mean, for example, is really helpful, because it's becoming it's not just joking anymore. It's not how it plays out and what it means. Enter on that. That one. Yes. Unsurprisingly, scope 2 is the correct answer. The gas may be coal, but less likely these days, and they've made the electricity that comes down the pylon, and then you pull it out of the socket. So that's scope 2. Okay, you buy products and materials from your suppliers. Which GHG scope do you report that as? I like the fancy graphics. Excellent. So as you might have guessed, this is scope 3. So anything that's in your supply chain, whether you're buying materials or products or capital goods, again, someone has manufactured those on your behalf. If you buy an asphalt product or a concrete product off Tarmac, they've produced that for you. That's in your scope 3. They've done all the processing and the manufacturing for you. You've paid them for that service. So even though you haven't done it directly yourself, indirectly you are responsible, partially responsible for those greenhouse gas emissions. Excellent. Well done. So yeah, that's scope 3. Cool. Right, so I'm just going to hide. That's it. Okay. You buy and consume fuel for your own fleet. For those who are in the know, I'm using the operational control consolidation approach. You buy and consume fuel in your own fleet that you operate. Which GHG scope does that get reported as? 1, 2, or 3? We've got a very knowledgeable audience today, and this is really good to see. For those of you who are less up to speed on scopes 1, 2, and 3, that's fine. The Supply Chain School provides all kinds of training workshops and lunch and learns. I did one yesterday on scope busting to describe what all this means and how it fits together. So if it's something that you're not so sure of or not so aware of, don't worry. Look at what the school has got for other training workshops and other sessions, and you can join those and get the knowledge. Okay, yes, scope 1. So if you directly burn that fuel, you have got some petrol or some natural gas and you are putting a match to it, in effect. You are burning it, you are directly causing those greenhouse gas emissions yourself. So therefore that's called scope 1, because you have the direct control of that. Excellent. Okay. Okay, I think we've got 2 more. So business travel. We all do business travel to a greater or lesser extent. We do probably less now than we did 16 months ago, but it still does occur. What does that fall into? So it could be going on a train, it could be flying, getting a taxi, getting a bus. 1, 2, or 3? Cool, excellent. Yeah, and as you might guess from the majority, business travel falls into scope 3. Essentially, scope 3 is saying anything, a service or a product that you've bought. So again, you're buying a service here. You're paying a train operating company, or you're paying a taxi driver, or you're paying one of the the flight companies to take you somewhere. They will be burning a fossil fuel somewhere in the course of that service delivery for you, and you're paying for that. So therefore, you are partially responsible for those emissions, or your allocation of those emissions. That is put into Scope 3. The reason why we have different scopes is to understand who has that control and ownership of those emissions, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Okay, I think this is the final question. You have a chemical process, and you're in that process in your factory, it emits some carbon as a byproduct. So not only are you using a fossil fuel, gas, potentially electricity indirectly, but you're also emitting directly from the process that happens. This could also be from waste anaerobic digestion, for example, where methane is given off. The usual example that people go to is cement, where the actual cement manufacturer from its raw materials will give off carbon dioxide as part of the process, if you're using limestone-based products and so on. Yes, that's Scope 1. Again, because you have direct control over it, you can determine how much you're consuming and how much you're delivering. So that's Scope 1. Okay, great. Thank you very much, everybody. As I say, well done. That's really pleasing to hear from my point of view that the understanding of these things is very prevalent. I'm going to skip back to the slides. Can I just get a nod from Emma or Tim that you can see my slides again? Thank you. Okay, so quickly through some of the kind of the 101 for carbon. I'm sure you'll have heard of the Climate Change Act. It's been around since 2008, and it's been updated a couple of years ago when Theresa May left office. Essentially now, the UK has got a target of 100% reduction, net zero, of our emissions for the UK. And this is what this graph from the Committee for Climate Change is showing. They're the body, the independent body that advises the government on what we should be doing as a country on climate change. What this is essentially showing us is that the solid black line is how we've reduced our carbon emissions as a country since 1990. They've gone down by about 40% in that time to where that red line is, which is great. And a lot of that has happened through the decarbonisation of our electricity grid, but some other efficiencies as well. What we've then got to do from now till 2050 is follow that purple dashed line down. That's our trajectory down to net zero. And you'll see underneath the line that there's these blocks in green, blue and purple with CB1, CB2 next to them. These are the carbon budgets for the UK. What are we going to do as a country to reduce our emissions? And this is at a macro level. So we're looking at big sector level things like manufacturing, transport, housing, agriculture, forestry, so big macro level sectors. How are we going to reduce down what we need to do? So there's lots of things in there in terms of the technologies and the ways of working that we need to bring in. I'm sure many of you will have heard about housing, for example, where we've got to move away from natural gas boilers to non-gas boilers over time. That's one of those big sectoral level issues that we need to deal with. So the law is enshrined. It is the law. We're one of the few countries that actually has one. We're certainly one of the very few major developed countries that actually has a law about GHG reduction, climate change reduction. Slight variation in Scotland and Wales because of the differences there in terms of their economies and their availability of renewable power, albeit I know Wales is looking to change that to 100% by 2050. And then a few weeks ago, an intermediate target came out. And again, this was a recommendation from the Committee for Climate Change that we have an intermediate target in law of a 78% reduction by the year 2035 compared to our 1990 baseline. So this is us as a country, what we emit as a country. So the new intermediate target was already on that trajectory. It's not a new target as such. The difference is that it's been enshrined in law. And this was a recommendation that came out in December last year when the CCC did their update. So it gives us an intermediate target to work towards rather than waiting all the way till 2050. As some of you might know, barely a month ago, UK central government put out PPNO 621, public procurement notice, June 2021. And this follows hot on the heels of the one from last year, PPNO 620, which was about social value and COVID recovery, but also climate resilience. This one focuses very much on carbon reduction strategies. And essentially it says that any organisation that is procuring works or services over £5 million ex VAT per year will have to require their supply chain contractors to have a carbon reduction strategy. As a tenderer, as a bidder, if you don't have one, you won't get past the first gate. Essentially, it's from central government and its executive agencies and its non-departmental public bodies as well. But we've spoken to many other organisations who are probably going to follow the same pattern, even though they're not in scope. When you read the document, you'll see what it means by in scope, and that's the central government, executive agencies, and so on. But there are others who are saying we're going to align with that for consistency. As with many government edicts and PPNs, there's not lots of detail, but essentially it's a very clear call that anything over £5 million a year will have to comply with this. And this is not just construction, not just built environment. This is any public sector procurement, any products or services. A quick whiz through what net zero means. It's another phrase that's bandied about. It's another bit of jargon that we all hear about. There is no one consolidated definition of it yet. It's a bit of a VHS Betamax issue, which shows my age. There's one definition from the UK GBC, which is very prevalent and very relevant to our sector. There's net zero carbon in construction, where they talk about the materials, the components that go up to the practical completion, and how you reduce those emissions as much as possible through the products you use, the materials, how you operate the site, and if there's any kind of leftover hard to decarbonize emissions that you just can't get rid of, you can then think about compensation, offsetting in some respects, or ideally greenhouse gas removal rather than offsetting. So that's about the construction. So it's that kind of, if you know some of the standards, it's the stages A, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the standard for environmental impacts of the built environment. And then there's, on the other side, there's the operational phase as well. So net zero operationally, how you reduce your emissions through lower carbon products, more efficient products, using renewable energy, green tariffs potentially. And again, anything that's hard to decarbonize as an offset. I mentioned a minute ago that they haven't quite coalesced on what net zero definition is. The science-based targets are looking at their own definition. Carbon Trust have got their own definition. They're all slightly different, but they all essentially talk about, we need to include the supply chain. It's not just about our own organizational impact, our scope 1 and 2. It's about our supply chain as well, the materials and products that we consume. Talking with one of our other partners in the supply chain school, they were very clear to say that when they looked at their impacts, they realized that 98–99% of their overall impacts are in their supply chain. So if you're going to be net zero and be transparent and holistic about it, you need to include your supply chain too. Just on science-based targets, there's slight differences there. Science-based targets is all about reducing our emissions in line with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It doesn't necessarily mean net zero, but it means bringing them down within a level that prevents us having global warming greater than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it still allows for a little bit of carbon emissions, but very little. We'll be using up our carbon budget in effect. But the science-based targets are taking a step further and looking at, well, if we get down as far as we can through science-based targets, there's still a little bit left over. Can we deal with that and then become net zero? So we come down the slide and then drop to the floor in effect through greenhouse gas removals to kind of deal with that last little bit that's hard to decarbonize. Again, not so long ago, 3 months ago in March, the Construction Leadership Council came out with a plan for carbon reduction, very high level. It's currently being consulted upon on what some of those targets might be. I'm sure many of you will have seen some of the draft targets, the draft objectives within that. But you can see that there's a lot of aspects that are covered within what they're looking at in terms of their strategy. It's the plant and equipment, it's the vehicles that we deal with, it's the buildings themselves, but not only just new build, but retrofit as well. That's a big part of the net zero challenge, is how we retrofit what's already out there, let alone the new stuff. And then importantly, it's measuring what we are doing, the quantification and understanding where we're heading and what we need to do to get there. And importantly for me, it's the design part as well, getting carbon reduction in at the design stage. right at the beginning before you put a spade in the ground. In effect, your biggest opportunity to reduce carbon is right at the beginning when you're on the drawing board, rather than when you're actually out on site with the specification. Okay. So just briefly, I'll go through this because it seems like a lot of you know this very well. Sources of carbon from your organization can come from your vehicles, from your plant and equipment, from the buildings that you own and operate. It can come from the chemical processes I mentioned in the Menti, but also fugitive emissions. Leaks from HVAC equipment, for example, is a prime example of fugitive emissions. Your suppliers also clearly will provide products, goods and services for you. They will cause emissions on your behalf, but you need to take that into account. So electricity, waste management services, provision of water, business travel we touched upon earlier as well. But importantly as well, your clients. So what you're delivering for your customer or your client, you are affecting their footprint as well and how efficiently they can operate. So that's part of your impact too. A great example in our everyday lives is a washing machine. So if I was a washing machine manufacturer like a Zanussi or a Hotpoint, I'd be sat in the middle as the business. My suppliers provide me with components and parts and materials. That's part of my footprint. But then when I sell that washing machine onto a householder and they use it, I have that influence. That's part of my footprint still because I have that influence. And some phrases here. You'll have heard of embodied carbon. That's the carbon that's emitted in the production of a material or a product. It can be applied to transport as well, the embodied carbon of your transport journey. Your operational carbon, what you do in the delivery of your service or your product, and then the end user carbon. So again, to use an example here, for Highways England, they will have operational carbon to run what they do, what they deliver, running the gantries, running the lighting, all the stuff that keeps the roads running. The embodied carbon, the capital carbon, comes from our co-speakers, Balfour Beatty, Tarmac and others. That's embodied carbon for Highways England. And then the end user carbon is each of us driving our cars up and down the roads, up and down the motorways. So that's how that splits out. But these, again, are bits of jargon that people are using more and more frequently, assuming that other people know what they mean. And then just very briefly on this, because I got the very strong impression that you know what this is all about. This is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, what Scope 1, 2 and 3 mean. So your direct emissions are those that come from anything that you control or own yourself. And then you can see that one in the middle. And no surprises, this image mirrors the previous one I just showed with the 3 green arrows and the words and the pictures beneath. So the direct emissions, what I was saying earlier, essentially if you put a match to something, or if you add a spark and you're burning that fuel, that's your Scope 1. Anything else is indirect because it's the consequence of someone else doing something for you somewhere else. Electricity has its own specific scope, Scope 2, because it's so ubiquitous and so relevant. And there's special things in there about green tariffs and how you manage that. And renewable energy. And then Scope 3 is all your other supply chain providers, be they materials or services or products. So that's a very quick canter through what scopes are, but as I say, I think the results from the Menti were very reassuring in that respect. And then lastly, I just wanted to take you through the carbon hierarchy. So I'm sure you know the waste hierarchy: reduce, reuse, refurbish, recycle, before you finally dispose of the material. No surprises, there's a similar one for energy. So if you can avoid using energy, then don't. If you can use something that's already there, that would be ideal. But let's be honest, quite often we can't avoid the use of energy. So if we do need to use some power and create some carbon emissions, use smarter design, think about how we can deliver it more efficiently, more efficient equipment. Importantly, think about behaviors as well. Often we think about engines being idling, so you might have a really efficient piece of kit, but if the engine is idling unnecessarily, we're wasting the opportunity to save emissions. Where you can switch to lower carbon and renewable sources, so we're going to hear some great examples from Tarmac later about switching materials to have a lower embodied carbon. Think about renewable sources of energy, generators that can be co-powered with solar panels where possible, welfare cabins that can have solar panels as well as a genset on the back. Think about using alternative diesel fuels, HVO being the prime one that everyone goes to, but thinking about alternatives rather than just what we always normally do. And bringing that into the mix along with less material, more efficient design, lean construction in that as well. And only when you've been through all of those things, when you've thought about using less material, lower embodied carbon material, renewable power, then only then think about compensation, think about offsetting or greenhouse gas removal as part of your strategy. I've had several organizations approach me and they just want to jump straight to that bottom rung. What do we need to pay to get out of our debt, our carbon debt in effect? That's the wrong way of thinking about it. We need to be reducing our carbon as much as possible before we even think about that. Great. So that was a very quick canter through what is normally a 3-hour training workshop. Hopefully you found it useful. Like Andrew said earlier, we'll be sharing these slides afterwards. I see there's a couple of questions. I'll try and pick those up in the chat box directly whilst we're having some of our presenters. We've got a great lineup today that just demonstrates collaboration entirely for me. We've got Dean Cowitt-Crisp from Highways England, who's team leader and principal environmental advisor. And we've got Tim Jordan from Balfour Beatty, supply chain manager for highways. And last but not least, Emma Hines from Tarmac, who's senior manager for sustainable construction. They're going to take us through some work that's been ongoing in the RDP and demonstrate some of the ways that are being taken, some of the policies and strategies, but some of the direct action that's being taken on carbon. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dean. Welcome, over to you.
Thanks very much, James. Let's move on, please, to my first slide. And again, please, this is what we're going to be talking about. Highways England, yes, you're here to hear about highways. Disappointing thing is, I suppose, we only have 2% of the roads in the country, so maybe you need to go somewhere better. The challenge of those 2% of the roads, those 4,300 miles, is they carry quite a lot of traffic. 2/3 of all freight are on our roads, and 1/3 of all other traffic, sort of 4 million people a day. And the carbon consequence of that road use, of course, is significant from the road user. Maybe touch on that as a Scope 3 emission. Touch on that maybe a bit later, because it is the big challenge. But equally, building, maintaining, operating that network and all those assets that are sort of listed out there in big round numbers is a whole host of embodied carbon and energy and resource that's gone into that. However, we kind of want to be optimistic about this. I'm not sure if I put that in as one of the words in the word art earlier. I put opportunity in, but I think there could be optimism as well. Roads need to be a really important part of net zero carbon travel. They dominate the transport carbon impact of the country, and unfortunately transport is the largest emitting sector at the moment. But it is changing. There are a lot of options out there at the car level, even at the motorbike level, to a significant extent the light van, and we're not far away from heavy plant and HGV really bringing in zero emission scenarios as well. I don't think I'm being sort of political about it by saying that in 2050 people still be there will still be a need to travel by roads. Again, on that optimistic theme, there is probably going to be parity between the emissions from you traveling on a road versus rail in the next 20 years. I can't remember the number. I think it's about 2035. There's likely to be some equality there, which is probably a good thing, even though trains can move an awful lot of people very, very efficiently. And I'm not being anti-rail, I hope, in saying that. But we do actually believe that the investments we can make a difference and support that route forward, James. Thank you. So what was really disappointing from your questions earlier, James, was that you said, do you have a plan, or is one in development, or I don't know. I didn't tick the I don't know. I had to tick the in development. I wish we'd been maybe just a month later with this, but then I would have shown this and shown a whole lot more around it. but we are, I'll say imminently, that's ideally this month, trying to get out our net zero carbon plan. I like the dates on it. I'll give you a little bit of a clue as to what they are, but we are looking to act quickly and efficiently and sensibly, of course, as well. The ambitions we have align, as you mentioned, with the 1.5 Paris Agreement, also with the UK's legislative commitment for 2050, all of which is on that trajectory that you showed from the Committee on Climate Change. So I am optimistic. I do see there's an opportunity here, an opportunity for Highways England. The ambition will be to be net zero as a company by 2030. And I sometimes have to pinch myself as to how far away that is, given I've been here for over 20 years, then actually I'm rapidly running out of time to make a sustained difference. As a company, the last year I owned the reporting for the Greening Government commitments. The target was, I think, a 45% reduction from a baseline, and like for like, we got it to 49.6 reduction. So I was pleased with that. Disappointed it wasn't a nice round 50%. I think might have got some headlines for that. But we've changed as an organisation in the last few years, grown, different budgets, different responsibilities, and the challenge is not an easy one. The challenge for the construction maintenance sector is really to get as close as we can to net zero by 2040. So that's known around the sector, and I'm sure Tim and Emma will be responding to that quite directly in their presentations following me. And then the big nut to crack, of course, is the road user. Somebody might say, well, we don't have direct control on vehicle manufacture, vehicle operation, fueling, driver education, driver behaviour, driver enforcement, etc., etc. But we have the same ambitions in safety as we do here in carbon, that we can play our part, we can help, we can direct, we can give opportunities, and help all of us who want or need to travel to achieve that 2050 target. So there's a heck of a lot to do. What has changed, I'd say, when I was asked in 2008 to lead a sustainability and climate change team. Myself, Jeff, and Ting, a young graduate, did our best. We had a massive conference in the Netherlands with the Rijkswaterstaat, which got CEOs and senior directors to talk at, which was quite an achievement, and got a lot of good stuff from that. But there was literally 2 or 3 of us talking about it in the early days. Now I'm starting to get upset that somebody else is doing my job over there, and somebody else is doing something that I thought was mine. And actually, I should stop getting upset about that, and I should celebrate that, because it's a really, really positive change, and actually is demonstrating. You mentioned procurement. Here we've got supply chain at various tiers on the call, and that's that's just a positive thing. That I will say. Yeah, let me just say it. Everybody's reacting to this now, which is fantastic. Okay, James, thank you. Tim, do you want to pick up from here once you unmute your mic?
There you go. Thank you, Dean. Hello, everybody. I'm Tim Jordan. I'm a supply chain manager for Balfour Beatty Highways. But before I start, I promised one of the wider. So as you can see here, P3 gives you a bit of a clue. So P3 stands for Mini Project 3. So and I look after carbon reduction, which is part of a wider project called the Sector Improvement Programme, or Sector Improvement Project, and that evolved from a joint Highways England and main contractor document called PID 59. So this aimed at tackling really aspirational challenges construction's faced for maybe 20, 30 years, including investment, productivity, innovation, and then latterly decarbonisation. So that resulted in creation of 6 mini projects, and these are demand and operational planning, efficiencies and innovation, carbon reduction, workforce development, category management, and performance management. So I promised my main project lead I'd mention the other projects as an introduction. So each of these mini projects has a joint House England, main contractor and supply chain delivery team. And the tier ones for old money or main contractors involved in the project are Balfour Beatty, Castaigne, Skanska, Kia, BAM, Morgan Sindall, Galliford Try and Osborne's. And the sponsor for the main project is a chap called Malcolm Dare. He's overall sponsor, and I've got an individual sponsor for carbon of a chap called Paul Gott, who's an MD at Morgan Sindall. So for carbon reduction, the overall goals and objectives were to improve the carbon data maturity for the products and solutions we use, and then use that enriched data to influence the delivery of very low or zero carbon infrastructure, and also probably quantify those benefits. So very quickly, from December 2021, we sort of formed a steering group, project steering group. We've collectively identified and prioritized some core opportunities and areas of challenge. We've agreed some strategic proposals, created some individual initiative teams, and created a sort of delivery roadmap for the now, next, later, sort of for the next 6, 12, 24 months. And we're on track now. We're starting to deliver some pilots. So pilots and me have been some fantastic engagement. The sessions we've run have all been very well attended, and everyone from throughout the value chain is really contributing, and that's resulting in some really balanced outputs, which we'll share with you in a minute. I'm also quite proud that we've adopted a sort of co-creation approach. So we've involved the sort of extended supply chain partners during the development process to help embed the change. So I'm going to highlight some key contributions from Atkins, Tarmac, and I'm just going to go through that. Aggregate Industries, Hanson, FP McCann, and that's just to date. There's many more we're going to engage in time. And it's at this part I should probably point out that we're using the data to inform some of our decisions. So House England have shared with us some data. So if you were to ask why we've approached these guys first, House England's data has demonstrated that maybe 30% of their carbon output is based on cement and concrete. It's about 11% for steel, and similar figure, 10-11% for asphalt. So there's a reason why we've engaged these guys first. And I think one of the things I'm proud of is we're sort of maintaining a sort of pace and intensity, and all the proposals that we're developing apply across highways to all the particular frameworks, whether that's RDP, smart motorways, complex infrastructure, or sort of all your OD work. And Dee will stole my thunder a little bit. One of the things that normally when you're leading a project is you've got to create some sort of burning platform to sort of get everyone's sort of juices flowing. But carbon is a hugely hot topic at the minute. So yeah, there's no need for me to create any sort of burning platform, I don't think. So we can move to the next slide, please, James. Right, so the goal for us all is the project, is decarbonisation as an everyday business process. So everything's just fully embedded in our day-to-day processes, and whole life carbon and net zero is the key factor in every decision we make. But we're not there yet. So we're starting off as a project. So this slide here just takes you through some of the process and toolkits we've built to try and maintain some momentum. So, you know, at the top left here, we started with a sort of brainstorm session, and we collectively identified all the sort of core opportunities, and then we sort of grouped these core opportunities into sort of key themes. So we got in green there, design optimization and materials reduction and reuse, logistics, energy and fuel, which at the minute for us is really plant, site accommodation, and fleet. And then we've got a little bit here which Dean always scratches his head about when we talk about incentivization and targets and KPIs, and how we can sort of make sure that this is really keeps its importance really. What we then did is a little bit of good old-fashioned prioritization. So we split off and we looked for things that were initiatives that were really going to deliver some high benefits, but were maybe easy to use, so the sort of silver bullets. And then as you go along, there's some stuff that's really important for us, but it's maybe more difficult to achieve. And we used that sort of tool to develop this roadmap. So we've got, you know, a now, next, later position, or we've got a roadmap for initiatives that can deliver over the next 6, 12 and 24 months. And I think that's really important because it's allowed us to tackle some sort of aspirational changes or some really chunky changes if you give yourself 2 years. I know Dean and myself and Emma are under pressure every day from Malcolm to deliver things tomorrow, to deliver really key aspirational grounding changes tomorrow, what's happening tomorrow. But I think we've got a sort of roadmap that's going to allow us to do the sort of the quick wins, if you like, but also to deliver some really aspirational stuff. And the last thing here, this thing here is just it's a funnel that we have. So all the initiatives that we've thought about are not lost. They're sort of just parked, if you like. When we deliver our wave 1, 2, 3, we'll just go back to the funnel and we'll go again. So just move on to the next slide, please, James. So from the outset as a project, I think we said we really wanted to deliver, so we didn't want to just hold these sort of talking shops. So I've said the goal is to embed carbon into all our business processes, but it starts as a project. And therefore, as a project, we target a delivery of 1 or 2 pilot initiatives really quickly to build sort of trust and confidence. And one of the things we've delivered now is a product called warm mix asphalt. And what I would say here is I wouldn't really worry about warm mix asphalt if you're not an asphalt specialist or expert or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's more the process we went through that I was going to share with you. So warm mix asphalt is quite simple for me. So it's a product that's produced and manufactured typically 40 degrees C lower than traditional asphalt or normal hot mix asphalt, if you like. So that reduces the CO2 emissions associated with production by 15%. It's actually probably a little bit more than that. We were quite conservative. The range was between 10 and 30, so we picked 15 to sort of under promise and over deliver. But in a minute I'll go off and tell you something quite exciting. So that was based on the uptake of it. And I'll save that last bit for the end comment of this slide. So this thing, so if the UK switched to warm mix asphalt, it would save sort of over 60,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. So the equivalent of cutting sort of 300 million miles of CO2 output from car journeys. There's also some other benefits with this. So it achieves traffic and temperature more quickly, leading to the earlier reopening of roads. It also has a potential to increase our productivity based on laying more material per shift. There's a argument it's a bit of a safer material because it's less hot when you lay it as well as when you produce it. So there's less steam, it's less unpleasant to work with. And really the barrier, so this really for me was like that silver bullet, which everyone said there wasn't one. The barrier to its adoption, and I think you went through, James, in one of your earlier slides about the barriers to adoption. The barrier to adoption in this place was the specifications. So it wasn't within the sort of, it wasn't a preferred option. Therefore, there's a departure required to lay this material on the network. And the departure process is tended to be sort of added cost, added time, added hassle. So people tend to steer away from that. So what we've done is worked collaboratively with HE to get their specifications team to commit an immediate review of the specifications, and with the intention of adopting warm mix asphalt as originally it was as a preferred option. Now it's going to be the preferred option. So basically, instead of a departure required for warm mix, there's now going to be a departure required for anything other than warm mix. And I think that for me has been a real fantastic quick win, if you like. And for materials, what I said to you before, for materials for me, and maybe solutions, this is the sort of blueprint we're going to use. So for materials, the goal is to sort of ensure that HE specifiers in this instance maximise the current supply chain capability. And that barrier is their specifications and departure process. And we've had to be very careful to point out that there's nothing wrong with the current list. Well, sorry, the current list is not wrong. It's not incorrect. It was just probably created over the last 10, 15, 20 years when carbon wasn't the priority. So now carbon is a priority. We need to refresh that list and go through that list and see what we can do to put these greener solutions in there. And what I would say is that when we first talked about this was seen as maybe potentially quite an onerous process and something that people have tried many times before and was going to be quite difficult to achieve. And what I would do is call out some fantastic support from House England, from Catherine Wilkins, from Jonathan Edwards and Matthew Wayman, sort of category leads and the specifications team. And that's been turned around in 8 weeks. So from 8 weeks from us putting the concept in front of them, that it's going to take I think it's 4 weeks away now, the specifications will be changed, and we'll be laying that material on the network without departure. We'll be building it into our, we'll be engaging designers to build it into the next projects, and that's a fantastic success. And just shows you what we can do really quickly. And as I said, wall mix is just a pilot. The follow-ups for asphalt, we've got foam. We're going to review the restrictions around foam mix and look at increase the recycled asphalt content in surface course materials. For concrete, we're looking at Portland limestone cement and blended concrete. Same principles. We're looking at the legislation, looking at the specifications, seeing if we can review those specifications to encourage the use of these products. And for precast concrete, we're looking at carbon capture, use and storage, and carbon cured concrete. So I suppose for me, it was just that it was more just calling out that methodology, which is that we've identified a product, we've sort of articulated the benefits, sold it to HE, Dean, Malcolm, all these people have helped us get the specifications team, and we can turn these things around really quickly. So that was just an example of pilot one. Sorry, I'm pressing the screen. If you go to the next one, James. The next example is we've created as a sort of project carbon management plan. And again, for me, the point of this document is maybe when we're moving more from sort of initiatives into sort of like embedding this into our business processes. So the project carbon management plan just establishes the means by which carbon management is implemented across the value chain. So what does that mean? So what we're trying to do is embed carbon into our existing business process by having project-specific targets, by having a communications strategy, by influencing early supplier engagement, collaboration, by having structured interventions from design through to build. And also, I think really sort of, different here in this space is we're all talking now about sharing best practice through an innovations register. So these innovation registers have always existed. The designers hold part of them, the main contractors hold part of them, HE will hold part of them. But what's happened is you do them on an individual project and you do some really good stuff, and then you move on to the next project and you start again. So I think what we're doing as part of this carbon management plan is capturing everything you've done on a project, and it's just held in a register. So when you start your next new project, you're not starting from blank or scratch again. You've got this pool of resources to say this is what we've done on this project. It'll also, this register will include things that we didn't do. So we might look at a project like the A57 and say, look, we looked at this, it wasn't great for the A57 for this reason, but on the A63 or the AM25 or whatever, it might be the right solution. So all that stuff is there, and we're also sharing it through HE across all main contractors. So that's been the big thing for me in this, that everyone's sort of recognizing that they're going to share this best practice and move forward together. So the next later position to that, so we've got that draft document, that draft toolkit. The next and later positions are to sort of train people up across the value chain so that they can start understanding carbon more and make those informed decisions more easily. And then the later position is we're actually looking at the development of tools that will optimize that value management process. So, the ultimate goal is you'll put two options in and it will come up with, this is option A and there's the cost of it, and there's the carbon output of it, there's option B, there's the cost of it, and there's the carbon. So it's a really sort of very quick, slick process. And those tools exist currently for certain in certain sectors, for certain sorts of categories of spend. We're just going to look at the sort of best athlete approach, look at these tools and see if we can look to either use the outputs of those tools or look to develop a common tool that will help influence those decisions. So you got the slide, James. Right, so this thing here, you can call out the red bits there. These are the things that we've implemented now or implementing, and there's the sort of the next sort of 12, 24 months. So really, I just want to show you this just to confirm we have a plan or a delivery roadmap for the next 6, 12, 24 months. The plan is live and it evolves. So every single week or month we're updating it and there's new things change. And the long-term aspect, as I've said, allows us to tackle some real aspirational change. You've got some stuff here like carbon capture, use and storage, and carbon cured concrete that's a bit more sort of suppose exciting, but a bit more difficult to sort of commercialise. And then the short-term aspect allows us to sort of see these silver bullets that are there and implement them quite quickly. So yeah, so we've got long-term aspirational change, short, medium, allows us to build and maintain momentum. The next slide, James. And that's it for me. So I'm now going to pass you to Emma, who hopefully is going to give you a sort of extended supply view of the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everybody. So yeah, Emma Hines, I'm the Sustainable Construction Manager at Tarmac. And as Tim said, I've been supporting the working group activities with Dean throughout this process. And I'm really focusing on the carbon management section and the materials section. On the next slide, I just added that in just in case anyone wasn't aware of who Tarmac are. Hopefully you all are aware that we provide construction materials, road contracting and building products, and supply materials such as aggregates, asphalt, cement, lime, concrete, also road contracting, building products and recycling services as well. So in terms of Highways England, it's about really focusing on our contracting services and the supply of materials. So Tarmac believe through experience that delivering low carbon infrastructure, it really is all about these top 5 points, and I'll just run through them quickly with you, but I've got some more detail later on. So when we talk about early engagement and collaboration, this is a perfect example of that. It's about clients, designers, consultants, contractors, material providers, all engaging around a project at a very early stage so that we can understand buildability, lean processes, the carbon management process, baselines, benchmarks, and work out what really is the right solution for each project. Really focusing on whole life is the next thing to make sure you get the best low carbon outcomes, especially when you're managing an asset that's going to be around for a long time. Flexibility and specification, we've already mentioned this, and it's to enable change to specification really when needed, and also innovation. So it's leveraging those new developments, and really for us, it's about helping Highways England be in a position to leverage them as soon as things are available when fit for purpose. And then engage in the supply chain, obviously other trades, you know, steel fabricators, other materials and suppliers getting involved as early as possible to understand all of the connectivities between these different projects. I've got a couple of case studies at the end of this presentation that kind of bring those to life a little bit more. What I thought I'd do on the next slide is really talk about UK Concrete. So Mineral Products Association is our trade association. And as Tim was saying, the next focus is concrete and reducing carbon in concrete. So as background, the cement and concrete industry have been aware and tackling this issue, and they have reduced their emissions already by 53% since 1990. However, there's still a long way to go. And whilst that table shows the reduction and shows how quickly they're reducing emissions, they account for about 1.5% of UK emissions now. And that still accounts for a big journey and a lot to do. And the next slide shows the roadmap to beyond net zero for the cement and concrete sector. And the first stage of the really looking at concrete for Highways England on this project was really to understand the background behind this roadmap and taking the levers from this to help to advance areas of innovation and advance the use of low carbon concrete for Highways England. So when I talk about that, what I mean is there are lots of opportunities to use low carbon concrete, and low carbon concrete is already available. On the next slide, we talk about specifying sustainable concrete, and actually these are pretty simple points that can be used to help to make incremental changes that provide carbon savings on projects and still ensure that we remain within the stringent specifications that are needed by Highways England. So we've talked about this in quite a lot of detail, and we need to understand the types of concretes and end uses so that we can ensure the specifications are taking full advantages of these options. And this could be the use of alternatives, so blended cements or recycled or secondary products and aggregates, additional use of admixtures, or even looking at 56-day strength versus 28-day strength, which actually can reduce cement contents, and they all have an incremental impact on how you can specify a much lower carbon concrete. And the Concrete Centre have a guide on this, on specifying sustainable concrete. I'm sure we can add that in the link if anyone isn't aware of that. But it's really about providing guidance and recommendation of how you can get immediate implementation and carbon savings. The next stage is all about monitoring, measuring, tracking and understanding your carbon footprint and understanding baselines. And this is where the carbon management plan comes in that Tim was talking about. From Tarmac's perspective, we produce a few thousand carbon footprints a year. Unfortunately, about 90% of those are retrospective. So it's after we've delivered concrete. And so what we want to do is actually say, let's stop the carbon counting and actually think about how we can optimize and save carbon up front. And that's something we're really keen to do, not just for Highways England, but across all markets that use concrete. And this is really important to understand that stage two, understand what your carbon baselines really are. And then on the next slide, Tim mentioned this quickly, actually, and it's about multi-component cements. And this is about a BEIS Industrial Energy Efficiency Accelerator Programme project, which is being managed by the Carbon Trust and Jacobs, the Mineral Products Association, ourselves, Hanson, BRE, all initiated a project to research and demonstrate low-carbon multi-component cement use in the UK. We're happy to say that BSEM 197 has been updated. So EM 197.5 was published in May this year, which is accepting the use of those multi-component cements. And now work is underway to make sure that the British standards and the concrete standards recognise these new cements. So we want those to be adopted as early as possible, and obviously really hoping that HE can also then implement that. And you can see by the graph, the numbers are small on purpose because they're just indicative at the moment, but you can see the first line is a CEM 1, and then the other smaller lines are actually the multi-component cement carbon footprints. So you can see there is a huge difference between the two, and all of these multi-component cements can be used in replacement of a CEM 1. So again, another way of saving carbon, and HE supporting early action to use these in new cements. Now, controversially on the next slide, I'm going to say this out loud: low carbon doesn't always mean most sustainable, because it depends what you're thinking about and what you're looking at. And Tim mentioned this earlier, when you're managing an asset, you want to think about whole life carbon. And this is especially important for infrastructure, where durability, long life and low maintenance are key, and it will impact on the asset management costs. And so I wanted to bring this to life a little bit more and actually talk about a case study from a few years ago. And on the next slide, you'll see a case study around Oxford Street. So this was something, this is about 15 years ago now. Oxford Street asphalt, due to the rutting of buses stopping, starting, sitting, loading, the asphalt was being replaced every 3 months, causing a lot of disruption, causing a lot of cost, and obviously a lot of wasted carbon. We were able to develop a solution that meant that we could replace it with a much higher resistant product, but it actually would have been a higher carbon footprint. However, and it is really important to understand this, the asphalt that we placed still remains today. And so actually the cost and carbon up front, when looking just at embodied carbon, there was much bigger savings when you're looking at it from a whole life perspective. And I just wanted to highlight that as another consideration that we all need to take when we're thinking about different projects and different solutions. And then finally, on the next slide, just another quick case study. And this is really about collaboration and early engagement. It's about being flexible in design and specification, tracking carbon, and having a continuous improvement process and a carbon management process. This was the M6 Heysham Link Road. 6 years ago, we finished this project with Costains. However, it was 9 years ago that we were engaging with client and contractor to develop that carbon reduction plan. And you can see from the numbers on that plan that we were very successful, 20% carbon saving. We actually saved some cost as well. We reduced the amount of materials that were actually used on the project as well. But none of those things would have been realized without that early engagement and collaboration between all of us in the supply chain. And I just thought that was a really nice case study to end on, and to hand back to James.
That's great. Thank you very much, Emma. Wonderful. Some really interesting statistics there, and a real good demonstration that this can be achieved and is being achieved. So I'm just going to push on there. We're going to move to a panel Q&A now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think that would be helpful. and I'm going to go straight into some of the questions that some of the delegates have posed in the Q&A box. So I'm just going to go to the most appropriate person, but by all means do join in these next few questions. So there's a question that I'm going to put to Dean, if I may, from Bill. Under Scope 3 supply chain emissions, is the expectation for net zero that all our clients are net zero as well?
Yeah, if we're your client, we will be. Hopefully, we'll be there before you as well. So yes, that we have, as you've been describing all the time, James. We have our own Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions as Highways England company limited, and yeah, we'll be on that journey. Yeah, and we'll get there before you.
Excellent. I like the travel analogy as well. Excellent, thank you. There's a question here about procurement as well, incorporating sustainability into the scoring of contract awards and weighting. Question from Neil, to try and move it away from the traditional cost program scorecard. And this is this can be aimed at all of you, but if I go to Tim first of all, and then we can pick up anyone else who wants to comment on that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and I suppose two points with it. One is that yes, I can speak on behalf of Balfour Beatty Highways. Yeah, we've absolutely now it is, and we've moved. I think many people on this call are probably familiar. We've moved to a sort of a Jagger e-sourcing tool that makes that much more achievable, makes it much more transparent, which makes it much more understandable. And within that tool, there are some sustainability and social value and different toolkits that we've got to help the sourcing teams now upskill very quickly. So to answer your question, yes, what we're doing now is that all our tenders now are there is a quality I think commercial envelope it's called, and sustainability and carbon are on that commercial envelope. And I'd expect to see the scores increase because it is now a sort of or the weighting, sorry, increase as carbon becomes more prevalent. To be honest with you, I think Emma mentioned it and Dean mentioned it. Well, Dean mentioned it on his calls before about being upset where everyone's interested in carbon now. I'm not a carbon specialist. I'm a supply chain manager, but carbon's talked about in sort of every meeting we go to now. So yeah, absolutely, it's going to move away from cost to value, and I think that's the approach we're being steered down by Highways England, and that's the approach we'll adopt with the supply chain. Cool.
Thanks, Tim. Dean, would you like to add anything on that one from Highways point of view?
Yeah, I'm not procurement side. Probably Tim and Emma see that better than me. But equally in design, which I think you mentioned earlier, the importance of carbon in design, James. So our standards are there that greenhouse gas emissions shall be minimised. That's the word. And in the assessment and appraisal, climate and carbon impacts are reported there. And as Tim's just said, really, there's more than an expectation. There's a desire, in fact, a standard for betterment, for reduction throughout all the works we do.
Super, thanks, Dean. Question here, possibly for Emma here, about is there an analogous similar roadmap for net zero on aggregates and asphalt as well?
And they are in progress. I certainly can't speak for the whole industry, but I can speak for Tarmac and say that we are looking at net zero roadmaps for all of our materials and products. As we talked earlier, it's about prioritising. So for aggregates, you're looking at between 2 and 4 kilograms of CO2 per tonne, whereas cement is a much higher. So it's about focusing on the high risk areas first and working through those. But yes, Tarmac are working on those roadmaps.
Super. Thank you very much, Emma. There's a question around the asphalt mixes that you were talking about in your presentations. There's one about conversion factors in the Highways England carbon tool, when that might appear, so we can actually do our number crunching specifically for that. And I know there's been a similar situation with some of the other materials as well. So maybe that's for Dean to pick up on.
Yeah.
If you want to pick up on that first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, annually we update the factors with the change in the BEIS DEFRA sort of corporate reporting factors. I've already asked, the email's gone to say, I was just talking to Matt Wayman, who Tim called out. I was just talking to Matt yesterday from Pavements team, and we said let's get a factor in. However, I would say that Emma's factor for warm mix might be different to somebody else's. So if you've got that declared from the supplier, then put that in. And then the sort of get out of jail card from you is you can do that now. Don't pick hot or old. If you've got warm, then say you've got warmed and put in the factor that your suppliers give you. Is that fair, Emma? Can you supply a carbon factor for your material?
Absolutely. So ourselves and the other members of the supply chain on the group all are able to supply carbon footprint numbers for their products for any of their sites. So yeah, get in contact with your supplier and ask for a carbon footprint.
Super, thank you both. And that's generally the way it goes. If you can do your own specific data, such as Emma's through an EPD or other routes, then go for that. If you don't have access to that, then go for some industry average, which is what Dean was referring to. And similarly, the DEFRA Bayes figures that come out every June, they came out 3-4 weeks ago, the latest updates. Those are being added to every year. I mean, they might not have warm mix asphalt on them yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes at some point. There's a question about, again, on warm mix asphalt, about the level of confidence and the reliability of the product once in service. I suppose if I come to you first of all, Emma, and then maybe Tim, because you touched upon some of that in your presentation about, with the Oxford Circus example.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not a technical expert, and I'm sure I could get someone from our technical team to answer that directly if needed. So, drop us a line. The results are as standard asphalt. We've been laying warm asphalt for many, many years. We've been trying to get warm asphalt adopted for many, many years. And so we have roads of laid 10, 12 years ago that actually can show their performance, and they're still testing on those. And I'm sure Hanson and AI will also be able to provide information on their durability of their warm asphalts. Tim?
Yeah, I was just, I'm part of a pavement optimization group where Tarmac, AI, Hanson, all these guys are on there. There are circumstances where warm mix won't be the right decision, and when we review the specifications, they'll look at that on a case-by-case basis. But I think the direction of travel is that it is a like-for-like alternative on sort of 80-90% of occasions. So that's where the direction of travel is. That there is, I mean, the question's probably valid because there was discussion yesterday about laying asphalt in the middle of the depths of winter on the middle of nowhere. There will be circumstances where you want to revert to other materials, and there's still going to be an option, but that would be by exception, not the rule. Hope that answers the question.
No, that's great, thank you. And there's kind of an extended question here from William about how clients and contractors get local authorities who are likewise managing roads, but they're not in the same league as Highways England, shall we say? How we get them to accept these innovative products and solutions as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're as a collective, we're helping that. So you've got some local authorities that I could call it Herefordshire with Tarmac. So Herefordshire have been using warm mix asphalt for 10 years. So it's not just a case of saying that some of these local authorities are probably more aggressive in terms of, or more what's the word, innovative in terms of these solutions. So we have got that question before. Again, working as a collective, working as a group, working collaboratively, we can, if there's a local authority that's maybe not as sure and doesn't, wants to speak to another local authority who've got 10 years experience of these products, and they can go on the network, they can see them in use, and we can facilitate that.
Cool, that's great. There's a question here which I don't fully understand because there's an acronym in it, so I'm going to punt it probably to Dean in the first instance, but under RDP, has a trick been missed in not including whole life cost as part of the SOFA? I'm curious to know what the SOFA is. Capital upfront cost is still driving decisions where a more expensive upfront solution would deliver better savings over a whole life. That's exactly the case study that Emma gave us for Oxford Circus. But it sounds like there's obviously some assessment methodology.
Yeah, we need a better cushion in the SOFA, I think. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. I apologise for that. Statement is the S, I think. Statements of funds available. So it's the money that's associated with the job. I don't know that whole life isn't considered in that. Though actually, if I think about it, of course, I did know that because of our capex opex separation. Yeah, whole life cost is really important. I would have said some time ago, Highways England, probably Highways Agency, was very good at it, and I think we've gone off the boil a bit in more recent years. I do actually see it. It's another one of those opportunity things with carbon thinking that that the whole life consideration needs to be brought in. I'll probably make a note of that SOFA question and just challenge strategy and planning and commercial. Just while I just talking money and carbon for a second, with our commercial team, we're definitely lining up. I think we've got a meeting tomorrow, but I've lined up the specification of the contract before to say, and they bought it, right? They took us hook, line and sinker. If you say you work out the cost of something from materials, resources, everything going into it, cost estimating. I said, if you wanted to make that in euros, which is very unlikely these days now, but if you wanted to put it in euros, you just put a conversion factor on. We can do the same with carbon, one of the conversion factors that was mentioned, James, that you've talked about. So, so actually that's going to come out, and what we're going to see with cost estimating is going to be carbon estimating, and that will raise eyebrows because people will see that connection and that relationship, which I think is a really, really good thing to get into as soon as we can.
That's great, thanks, Dean. And that links to a question from another attendee about having carbon emissions invoiced monthly. So on your invoice for your materials, so you know how many meter cubed, how many kilos, here's the price, here's the value for it. I suppose that's a wider question about providing carbon data alongside cost data, whether it's in invoicing, BIM models. One of you were talking about that earlier as well. It sounds ideal, but what's the reality of doing that?
Is it ideal though? Because what you'll end up getting is an average of an average of an average of an average, and then so I would question that on the bigger projects. The carbon management plan is about on the bigger, and I like I stressed, the bigger projects and by agreement that we're going to look to calculate actuals for certain categories of spend. So for a pavement where it's we talked about concrete, cement, steel, and pavement, they're the big ticket items. We're going to try and calculate actual figures. It's not beyond us to work out, right, the materials coming from the plant A and plant B. What are the actuals from those those plants? And we can work out the actuals. I appreciate we can't do that for every, if we're buying a spoonful of cement and concrete. Emma mentioned before about her carbon management tool, and I know other suppliers have got similar carbon management tools. And the retrospective aspect of it, what we're doing now is part of that carbon management plan is to try and agree what methodology we use for these key areas up front, and we'll record actuals. So I think we'll always have those averages are important, but I'll just be careful that you don't dumb it all down by using these averages.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point about being able to see what the difference is as well. If you do move to a different product, if you've just got an average, that's harder to pick out when you move to more innovative product. Emma, would you like to add anything to that point?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable, isn't it, that as more data is provided electronically and through innovation, we've got electronic point of delivery tickets now. We know customers can see where our trucks are. That there will come a stage when more data is available, and as Tim says, it's about how it's used and how decisions are made using that data. And I think obviously there's going to be a carbon counting aspect for a project, but also it's about making decisions. And I would be worried and put just a point of caution in there when we're thinking about whole life carbon and thinking about different solutions for different types of projects.
Super, thank you. Just looking at the clock in the corner of my screen, I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and then I'll sum up. And this is kind of this is a great end question from Neil. When new roads are to be scoped, designed, or built, should the scoping documents prioritize alternative travel options, public transport, active travel above the use of the car? So that's a $64 million question there. I'll go to Dean first of all, as Highways England.
You could have ended on me for the big finale, but the short answer is yes, because it's not even client. I was going to say it's the client scheme requirements that set out the specification for a job. We've been talking all this year and most of last with DFT that they should be very different. They should have this. If you want to call it a funny word that I'm going to have to get used to calling, I suppose, environmental sustainability aspect of what is the brief for this job. But that's still a brief for a road. That's when we pick it up in our project control framework, and I start speaking acronyms again, but in our PCF, we will pick that up at stage 0, but there's thinking before stage 0. And that is where from our route studies, I think the word routes, I'm sure it's route studies they're called now. What's the problem here? And the solution isn't build a road or build a wider road. The solution might be, well, that is that is I mean, good, we did build a road at A14 Kettering, but what we had there was, if you like, inappropriate traffic on the trunk road. So rather than build whole new roads, we just added a lane, which I suppose is not build nothing, it was build less. And you have an inside lane there because the A14 is part of the town's ring road effectively. So you shouldn't have that sort of traffic mixing with trunk road traffic. So maybe not build nothing, but certainly build less. But yeah, those questions, and literally just challenged them again in a meeting yesterday about how we're going to count carbon at that early stage 0 of the project control framework. And of course, my hand went up and said, but you know, the first thing is build nothing. And said, yes, absolutely, there's a relationship there elsewhere. It might not be the most visible, perhaps. So then maybe that's its weakness, James. Yeah.
Cool. That's great. Well, thank you very much to all our guest speakers today. It's been really interesting, really helpful. Just in summary, I think there's a few nuggets of wisdom there to take away. And these are coming more and more prevalent in what we're delivering through the supply chain school, which is good that we're hearing them more frequently. It's about innovation, looking at new opportunities for different materials, engaging with suppliers and manufacturers to push those forward and bring them to market as quickly as possible. Everything that we see, the technology is available. It's about the acceptance and awareness of those materials rather than the technical capability of the materials themselves. There's no one silver bullet for what we're looking at here. There's a blend of actions. I think through the 3 presentations we've seen today that there are many different ways of addressing this, and within a particular material as well, that there are different options as well, depending on what the outcome is that you're looking for. Certainly there's a big message about whole life carbon, whole life cost. You know, from the mantra of the infrastructure carbon review, if you reduce carbon, you reduce costs. So look at it in the round, look at the bigger picture. I think that case study of Oxford Circus really brings that home. And then really getting that idea of carbon reduction in at the start, well before design, well before concept, build it in as part of that plan, that it's not an afterthought to hit some kind of carbon reduction strategy targets. And finally, I'd just echo that point about think about other impacts. A couple of the presentations picked up on it, and I did earlier on as well. Carbon is very much front and center of what we're talking about, but there are other things that we should be addressing as well. The skills agenda, local air quality, circular economy. We've talked about reducing our material consumption. That drives circular economy as well. So a lot of good messages coming out of this. Thank you very much for your attention this morning. If you look in the chat box, there is a link for the feedback form. If you do have a couple of minutes, we really appreciate you going and filling that in. Just gives us a sense of how well we've done today, but also what other topics you'd like to hear from us in the future. And that just leaves me with the honour of saying thank you to my 3 speakers, and have a good afternoon. Bye for now.